panic, but there's a man outside, pointing a flashlight straight into my bedroom window.
My son's voice was steady on the phone, but I could hear the tension hiding under his calm tone. I froze in the middle of the grocery store aisle, a bag of apples halfway to my cart. "Stay on the line," I said, already abandoning my basket. "I'm coming home right now." We had only been living in Brookhaven Meadows for 3 weeks, a so-called secure community, advertised as family-friendly, peaceful, and well-governed by a dedicated homeowners association. The brochure promised manicured lawns, safe streets, and neighbors who looked out for each other. What it didn't mention was that the neighborhood watchdogs came with badges they had printed themselves, and that stepping even a little out of line could turn your dream home into a nightmare. As I sped back through traffic, my son whispered updates. "He's still there, Mom, standing on the sidewalk. He's not moving, just staring at the house. And now he's writing something down on a clipboard." I gripped the wheel tighter. I already knew who it had to be. Just 2 days earlier, I'd received a bright orange slip tucked under my windshield wiper. HOA violation, unauthorized basketball hoop. The so-called infraction: my son had been shooting baskets in the driveway with a portable hoop we'd owned for years. Apparently, sporting equipment left visible from the street violated Section 14 of the covenant. When I'd called the HOA office to dispute the notice, the response had been curt. "All rules apply equally. Pay the $100 fine within 7 days to avoid escalation." Escalation, the word still rang in my ears. By the time I reached our street, adrenaline was coursing through me. Sure enough, there he was. A heavy-set man in an ill-fitting security enforcement jacket, scribbling in a notebook and shining his beam at our home like he was casing it for a break-in. I parked hard at the curb and got out. "Hey," I shouted, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" He turned slowly, smirk tugging at his lips. "Official HOA business. Ma'am, just documenting repeat violations. You'll be hearing from us." His hand tapped the holster at his belt, where a stun gun, or maybe something worse, rested. It wasn't a friendly gesture. My son stepped onto the porch behind me, phone still in hand. "Mom, that's the guy who's been circling the block the past 2 nights. He just parks and watches." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just about a basketball hoop. We were being marked. The next morning, a thick envelope was shoved under our door. Inside was a notice of escalated violations, listing infractions I couldn't even comprehend. Improper hedge trimming, excessive trash bin visibility, unauthorized curtain color, each came with a fine attached. $50 here, $75 there, climbing into the hundreds. At the bottom, bold letters read, "Final warning, continued non-compliance may result in legal action, liens, or eviction proceedings, as per HOA by." I sat at the kitchen table staring at the list, fury building in my chest. I wasn't just a single mom with a teenage son trying to start fresh. I was a civil rights attorney with 15 years of courtroom battles behind me, and these petty tyrants thought they could intimidate us with orange slips and flashlight patrols. But what I didn't know then was that this wasn't simply about rules or property values. This HOA was hiding something far darker, and they had chosen the wrong family to target. The morning after I decided to fight back, I drafted my first letter. Years of practicing law had trained me to see weaknesses in contracts, and the HOA's bylaws were full of them. I highlighted half a dozen clauses that were flat-out unenforceable under state law, including their so-called inspection rights and their outrageous fine structure. I emailed the board, CCing the County Housing Authority for good measure, and ended my message with a clear warning. Any further harassment or attempts to enforce unlawful provisions will be met with legal action. I thought it would buy us some breathing room. Instead, it painted an even bigger target on our backs. By evening, our driveway was vandalized, a giant red X spray-painted across the concrete. My son stood staring at it, fists clenched. "They're trying to scare us, Mom." I took photos, documenting everything, and all they've done is hand us more evidence. But inside, my nerves buzzed. This wasn't random. It was a message. The next day a letter appeared in our mailbox. No return address. Just one sentence typed in bold. "You can leave quietly, or we can make you leave." I carried it straight into the house, set it on the table, and looked at my son. "This isn't just an HOA with too much power," I said quietly. "This is a racket." That evening, Evelyn returned, this time with another neighbor, a tall man in his 40s named Daniel. His eyes darted around nervously as he stepped inside. "You need to see this," he said, setting a USB stick on my counter. Security footage from my front camera. 2 nights ago, around 2 a.m., we plugged it in, and my stomach turned. The footage showed Frank, the so-called enforcer, walking right up to Daniel's house, peering into the windows, then spray-painting something small and red near the garage before slipping away into the dark. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. The next morning, I got a violation notice. Unauthorized paint markings on property, a $300 fine. They vandalized my house. Then fined me for it. I felt rage boil inside me. That's not enforcement. That's extortion. Evelyn's expression was grim. Exactly. And they've done it before. Families don't last here once they're targeted. They either pay until they're bled dry, or they sell cheap and get out. Daniel added. And guess who always buys the houses? Companies connected to the board president's brother-in-law, Shell, LLCs. They flip the homes or hold them for development. This isn't about rules, it's about money. That night, I could barely sleep. Every creak of the house made me think of Frank lurking outside. When headlights swept across our windows, I sat up in bed, heart pounding. But it wasn't Frank this time. It was a police cruiser. Hope flickered for a second, until I realized the officer wasn't there to help. He was talking with Richard Dawson, the HOA president, right there under the streetlight. Richard pointed at our house more than once. The officer nodded. My son watched from his window. Mom, are they working together? I didn't answer. But the truth was obvious. The HOA wasn't just harassing us with fines. They had local connections, maybe even protection. The next HOA meeting was mandatory. I almost skipped it, but Evelyn urged me to go. You need to see how they operate in the open. So I went. The community hall was packed, folding chairs lined up in neat rows. At the front sat Richard, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smirk that belonged to someone used to getting his way. Beside him, Frank loomed like a guard dog. When Richard called the meeting to order, the atmosphere was suffocating. Residents who dared ask questions about rising security fees were cut off. Anyone who pressed harder was laughed at or threatened with fines. Finally, I stood. I have questions about the legality of your enforcement methods, I said, voice steady. Specifically your so-called right to enter private property, your escalating fine system, and your selective targeting of certain residents. Murmurs rippled through the room. Richard's smirk faltered for a moment before he leaned toward the microphone. Mrs. Collins, we appreciate your legal opinion, but this community thrives because of strict rules. If you're not comfortable, perhaps Brookhaven Meadows isn't the right place for you. Or perhaps, I countered, this board has overstepped its authority, and the residents here deserve transparency about where their money is going. Gasps echoed. Richard's jaw tightened. You'd better watch yourself. We don't take kindly to troublemakers. Frank stood then, arms crossed, staring at me with the weight of an unspoken threat. The room went silent. I refused to flinch. You should know something about me, Mr. Dawson. I don't scare easily. After the meeting, as I walked to my car, someone slipped a folded note into my hand. No name, just shaky handwriting. They're recording everything, cameras, microphones, even in the park benches. Be careful. I looked up, but whoever had given it to me was gone. When I got home, I found another letter taped to our door. This one wasn't typed. It was written in thick black marker. You're already on the list. Sell now, before it's too late. My son read it over my shoulder, his voice trembling for the first time. Mom, what if they mean it? I put an arm around him, even as my own chest tightened with fear. Then, they've just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because we're not going anywhere. What I didn't realize then was how far Richard and his cronies were willing to go, and that the next move they made would push everything past the point of no return. The breaking point came 3 nights later. I was reviewing case notes at the dining table when the sound of glass shattering jolted me upright. My son shouted from upstairs. I grabbed my phone, heart hammering, and ran to the living room. A brick lay on the carpet, surrounded by shards of glass. Taped to it was a note in the same bold marker as before. Last warning. Before I could even dial 911, headlights flared outside. A black SUV idled in front of our house, engine rumbling. My son stood beside me, pale but resolute. It's them, Mom. I pulled him back from the window. Stay away from the glass. But I was already moving, anger flooding through me. Enough was enough. The next morning, I contacted Daniel and Evelyn. It's time, I told them. We go public. Together, we organized a private meeting at a local cafe outside the neighborhood, away from hidden HOA cameras and microphones. Nearly 20 residents showed up, each with their own stories. Fines for invented violations, mysterious property damage, sudden fee increases with no explanation. When I laid out the evidence, photos of vandalism, Daniel's footage, Evelyn's notes, and the threatening letters, I saw fear turn into something stronger. Anger, resolve. We've been bullied long enough, one man said, slamming his fist on the table. If we stand together, they can't pick us off one by one. For the first time, the community wasn't divided. We were united. The HOA board must have sensed the shift, because the retaliation was immediate. The very next day, every one of us who attended the meeting received a letter titled Notice of Termination of Membership. It threatened liens, forced evictions, even police involvement, if we didn't comply with community standards. That night, someone slashed the tires on my car. Evelyn's fence was torn down. Daniel's water was mysteriously shut off. It was clear, Richard and Frank were panicking, and panic made them dangerous. The showdown came at the next emergency HOA meeting. Richard called it to address rising disorder, his words for our resistance. The hall was packed, but this time the air felt different. People whispered, eyes narrowed, waiting for him to slip. Richard began with his usual arrogance. We are dealing with a group of agitators who want to destroy the harmony of Brookhaven Meadows. These individuals, his gaze landed on me, have spread lies, encouraged defiance, and endangered property values for all of us. I stood, calm but loud enough to cut through the murmurs. No, Richard, what's endangered here isn't property values. It's our rights as homeowners. And I have proof. Gasps rippled as I lifted a folder thick with documents. Financial records showing over $400,000 missing from HOA accounts. Violation notices falsified. Homes vandalized by your so-called security officer. And let's not forget the shell companies buying properties under your brother-in-law's name. Richard's face darkened. Those are baseless accusations. Really, I shot back. Because half this room has video, receipts, and letters just like mine. We've been documenting everything, and I've already shared it with the county housing authority and the state attorney's office. The room erupted. Residents began shouting, not at me, but at him. Where's the money, Richard? Why did my fees triple last year? You vandalized our homes. Richard slammed his hand on the podium, voice rising. Order. This meeting is adjourned. But no one moved. Instead, Evelyn stood. Her voice, though aged, carried strength. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence under Article 9 of our bylaws. Hands shot up all across the room. Dozens. Almost unanimous. Richard's smirk vanished, replaced by something raw and ugly. Rage. That's when Frank snapped. He shoved his chair back, stormed down the aisle, and yanked a weapon from his belt. Not a gun this time, but a heavy steel baton. You think you can overthrow us? He roared. Chaos erupted. People screamed, scrambling from their seats. My son clutched my arm, eyes wide. Frank advanced, weapon raised. But this time, he wasn't facing a scared family alone. Half a dozen residents surged forward, tackling him to the ground. Daniel was among them, wrestling the baton from his grip. When police arrived minutes later, they didn't treat Frank like a security officer. They treated him like the criminal he was. And when Richard tried to intervene, demanding Frank's release, the officers silenced him with a warrant. The housing authority had moved faster than even I expected, pulling records and issuing charges for fraud, intimidation, and misuse of HOA funds. The tyrants of Brookhaven Meadows were finally finished. Weeks later, the neighborhood looked different. The new interim board, led by Evelyn as president and Daniel as treasurer, tore up the ridiculous rulebook and replaced it with something fair. Residents were free to decorate their yards, play basketball in their driveways, and live without fear of a clipboard and flashlight haunting their windows. At our first community cookout, neighbors laughed and shared food like we were finally the family the brochures had promised. My son played ball with kids he hadn't dared talk to before, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't since moving in: peace. But as I watched the smoke rise from the grill, I knew it wasn't just about one neighborhood. HOA abuse was spreading in communities everywhere, and sometimes it takes one family standing up, refusing to back down to show others they don't have to live in fear. As my son tossed the ball and smiled for the first time since the ordeal began, I whispered to myself, they marked the wrong house. Because in the end, bullies never win, not when people stand together.